The video you are about to see is extracted directly from BIM After Dark Volume 3. Head on over to bimafterdark.com and select Volume 3 to find out more. When it comes to casework and cabinetry, the out-of-the-box families in Revit are actually pretty good. You can see here, these are the typical out-of-the-box. There's an upper cabinet, double door. Here's a bottom base cabinet with a two bin sort of thing. And they typically work really well. The parameters flex very nicely. If I go into my elevations, they look right in elevation, but they're lacking a little bit of detail. So if you're creating a hospital or an exam room or something, these might work okay. Maybe a school, I don't know, with these flush sort of cabinets. But if you're doing residential, for instance, or maybe more high-end commercial, you might want to add a little detail. For example, you might want to add some shaker type doors. Maybe the hardware is going to change, etc. So I highly suggest that you start with an out-of-the-box cabinet and you modify it to make your more custom cabinets. No need to start from scratch. And so what I want to do today is show you how to modify a cabinet and add some little custom details in the easiest, fastest way. And again, it doesn't take as long as you think it would, and it's actually pretty simple. So we're actually going to use this upper cabinet. So it's called upper cabinet double door. And it's an out-of-the-box family. So if you do have your family libraries installed under U.S. Imperial or Metric, I guess if you're not in the U.S., under casework and wall cabinets, you could see there's a bunch of wall cabinets. So the one that we have in there is the upper cabinet double door, and that's what we're using. So I'm going to go into that family. And here we go. So this is the upper cabinet double door family. If I go into my elevation, my placement side elevation, you can see there's a couple parameters here. There's a height parameter that pushes and pulls down. There's a top of cabinet parameter, which is at 7 feet. The height is at 2'6". And there's an EQ to keep this symbolic line in the middle. So that's all pretty straightforward. If I go into my floor plan, you can see there's a width parameter in here. And so I'm not going to stretch that right now, but the width parameter stretches the width of your cabinet. And if I go to my left side, there's a depth parameter here, which I assume is connected to this front reference plane. For some reason, they didn't drag it through, but that's the assumption there. If we pull it, you can see it's locked, so it's not going to move with it, but you get the idea. So there's a depth, there's a width, there's a height. If you've used this family, you already know all of this stuff. But I always like to check especially when I'm modifying existing family, I always like to check all the different views to see if I'm missing something. That you can check through the parameters themselves if you go through edit types just to see what you got going on here. You can see here's our depth, our height, top of cabinet, and our width with all check boxes. Okay. So the easiest way to start flipping around with doors, and the way that I like to do it, is to make them as nested families. And the reason you could do this as a nested family is that you can actually load in a couple different nested families, and then with the flip of a switch, you can control whether it's a shaker, a Victorian, a flush, all kinds of different door types. So what I'm going to do is I'm actually going to delete my doors. So I'm going to select my existing door and press delete. And you can see on the placement side, there's actually a line that they place in here, and I think we're going to get rid of that too. So I'm just going to delete that line. For now, we'll leave the handles, but we can tweak the handles later. So now we have basically just the cabinetry here without doors. One of the things that's always bothered me about the out-of-the-box casework is that you can't control the overlay amount here. So see this dimension here? They never had a parameter to control that. So what I want to do is quickly create that parameter, because when we're going to bring in our hosted family, we're definitely going to want to be able to control that, or whether we lock it as a flush or an overlay, etc. So I'm going to draw a couple reference planes. I'm going to type RP on my keyboard, and I'm going to draw a reference plane here. I'm going to do the same thing across the bottom here, at the top I mean. Now I'm just going to mirror this, typing MM on my keyboard, and I'm going to mirror this, typing MM on my keyboard. So now we've added these 4 reference planes. Now with those 4 reference planes, I'm going to dimension them. Dimension it there, dimension it here, dimension it here. And we have these 4 dimensions. I'm going to type UN on my keyboard, and I'm going to turn off that suppressing 0 feet. Click OK, And I'm also going to change the scale of this view to something a little smaller so that we can read everything. There we go. So now you can see we have these 4 3/4 inch dimensions. And what those are going to do is they're going to drive this reference plane. So select all 4 of those, say add parameter, and we're going to call them overlay amount. Or maybe just say overlay. We don't have to add the word amount. So there's our overlay. And we might want to add one for the center. If we want this to be completely flush or not, I think we want to add a parameter, a set of parameters here. So I'm going to draw a reference plane. I'm going to move it over 3/8 of an inch. I'm going to mirror it using on my keyboard. I'm going to dimension the overall, and then I'm going to dimension, first I'm going to dimension the overall, and I'm going to give this a parameter. I want this to be different because if we want the outside to be 3/4 and we want the inside to be flush, we want to be able to control that. So I'm going to say center overlay. Maybe not the right term, but you get the gist. Center overlay. Now I want to dimension right here. Again, dimensioning these 3 and click EQ. So now it'll flex outward and inward, just like our other families that we dealt with. So now what we want to do is we want to make sure that this this wooden box, is actually locked to these reference planes. So there's a couple ways we can do it. We can push and pull these shape handles or align them, or we can go into the extrusion, which I'm going to do, edit the extrusion, delete the interior box, and redraw it. By redrawing using the rectangle tool, we'll be able to quickly lock it. So if I pull this down through here, you can see these 4 locks pop up. And click finish. Okay, so what that did is, if you notice, let me do this again. That error said that there's a circular chain of reference. And so if I press the rectangle, and you notice how it's highlighting, it's actually highlighting the existing shape. Well, what I'm telling it to do is actually lock to the existing shapes, which we don't want, right? Because this shape doesn't exist anymore, and Revit's not happy about that. So there's a couple of things we can do. We can draw a rectangle sort of on the inside here, and we'll pick up a couple of the other reference planes. The other thing we can do is we can simply draw a rectangle and use the align command to make sure that these magenta lines, the sketch lines, are actually locked to our reference plane. So I'm going to do that. I'm going to type AL on my keyboard. I'm going to hit the reference plane, hit the pink sketch line. And I'm going to do the same thing all the way around this for all 4 of these sides. So again, it's AL, reference plane, sketch line, lock. Reference plane, sketch line, lock. And click finish. And there we go. So now we're locked to the inside here. The final piece is to draw a little center portion, because if we do have a non-flush, even with the flush, technically there could be a middle piece here. So we're going to quickly model that, and we're going to give that a visibility parameter later. But I'm going to select my enclosure. I'm going to type CS on my keyboard, which is to create similar. I'm going to use my rectangle, and I'm going to draw this center piece here. And then I'm going to make sure I lock it. I use the rectangle tool because then these 4 locks will come up. And I'm going to click finish. If we go in 3D, you can see we have this center piece here. And you can see here's the centerpiece there. So with that centerpiece, we want to make sure it stays inside of our cabinet. So I'm going to draw one more reference plane. I'm in the floor plan view. I'm going to draw a reference plane there. I'm going to dimension it. I'm going to make the dimension 3/4 of an inch. For now, I'm just going to lock it at 3/4 of an inch because I don't expect that to be much more. It would end up being probably a 1/2 inch. But I can now pull this extrusion and lock it to that reference plane, and then I can use AL on my keyboard, and I can lock this the top piece to the reference plane. So that's our little centerpiece there. If I go to 3D, you can see it right here. You'll notice it looks a little thick in my view, the line work. That's because if you select this, you'll notice the subcategory is cabinet. If I select this one, there is no subcategory, so I'm going to set that to cabinet so that it's the same as our outside piece. And there you go. So now we're ready to create a custom door and load it into this family. How do we do that? Well, we're just going to make a new family. But I'm going to start with generic model, and if we want, we can change it to casework afterwards. But generic model will give us a little more freedom when it comes to parameters. So I'm going to start generic model. And now we want to set up our parameters. So I'm going to type RP on my keyboard and draw a reference plane. And we're going to start it with 8 inches there. Then I'm going to mirror it. So that's going to be our width parameter. And then I'm also going to create a reference plane on the bottom here. I'm going to make this maybe 3/4 of an inch, and that's going to be our depth. And then we're going to dimension. So I'm going to dimension to the front edge of this. I'm going to call this a parameter. I'm going to say depth. And this we're going to keep as an instance or as a type parameter. Okay, so it's going to stay as a type parameter. The width and the height you'll see are going to be instance parameters. So that's going to be a depth. I'm going to type UN on my keyboard and turn off that suppressing 0 feet because it's going to be very annoying for everyone involved. Change the scale a little bit. Okay. Now we want to do an overall. And we're going to call this width. And this is going to be an instance parameter. And then I'm also going to create that EQ dimension so that the center stays the center. Perfect. Okay. Now what we want to make here is we're going to make a shaker. And so with the shaker, we're going to actually have an offset, right? There's going to be an offset inside each one. It's going to have sort of a frame. And then there's going to be an insert. So we're going to need a couple more reference planes. So first, I'm going to copy this reference plane in 3/8 of an inch. And that's going to be the depth of our actual insert. And so for the sake of this, I'm actually going to make it EQ. So I just dimension it, and it's going to be half of whatever the depth is. So if the depth goes out to here, this insert will stay half. For the sake of time, that's probably the quickest way. You could always give that a separate parameter and be able to control that if you want. Then I'm also going to I'm going to copy this reference plane over. And let's go with maybe 2 inches first. And then I'm going to mirror it. Okay. So what I want to do here is these two reference planes are going to control the insert, whereas these exterior reference planes are going to control the overall door. So these two exterior reference planes, I'm actually going to make them strong references. So if I select them both, I say strong reference and apply. What that means is when I bring them into my family and I align this edge, it'll actually stretch instead of pulling the entire family. And if you don't know what I'm talking about, you can view the Introduction to Reference Planes video within this series. So there we go there. Now we're going to want to create a dimension for each one of these. And this dimension is going to be our frame. So I'm going to select them both. I'm going to add a parameter. I'm going to say frame. And we can leave that as a type. So there's our rig in plan view. So now the last thing we need to do before drawing our geometry is create a little bit of a rig in the elevation view. So let's go to our elevation view, our front elevation view. There's our front elevation view. I'm going to draw reference planes now because we're going to block out this frame. I'm going to arbitrarily draw a distance from the base here because we're going to lock this in our new family, so we don't actually really care about the height here. We could create a parameter and sort of mess with that, but it's going to be an instance height that we're going to lock within our cabinet, so it won't really matter at this point. So I'm going to draw it in there like that. I'm going to copy this one up. Let's go 3 feet for now so it's nice and tall. I'm going to take these and I'm going to copy them in each 2 inches. So I'm going to copy this one down 2 inches. And then I'm going to dimension the overall dimension and these individual 2-inch dimensions. Okay, and just like before, we want to make the exterior references a strong reference, and the interiors are going to stay a weak. Select our 3-foot dimension, add parameters. We're going to call it a height, and we're going to make it an instance. So it's not going to be a type, it's going to be an instance parameter. Whereas these two are going to be our frame, which we already have set, frame 2 inches. And remember, all these reference planes here we've already locked and created a place for in our plan view. So now we've got the start of a shaker door. Okay, so now what do we have to do? We have to create our geometry. So to do that, we're going to simply go to Create, Extrusion, and I'm going to draw a rectangle. Using the rectangle tool allows me to use those locks, right? So if I drag from one end to the other, Now I can lock this. I can do the same on the inside, and I can lock it, and I can click Finish. Now if I go in 3D, you see we've got our extrusion, and if I go to my floor plan, I can make that extrusion the correct depth. Right, so I'm going to make sure I lock it to the back here, and if I pull this forward, I'm going to lock it to the front, which is the full-on depth, and there you go. So now all we need is our insert. Again, I'm going to go right back to my elevation view. I'm going to go to Create, Extrusion. I'm going to use a rectangle, and I'm going to move until it looks for the reference plane. See how it's finding the reference planes? That's how you want it to click. Same over here. If you can try and find the reference planes, it's better that way so you're not locking to geometry. There's the reference planes. Now you can lock it here and click Finish. Go into your floor plan view and pull the shape handle back to the middle piece and pull this shape handle to the center. Now if I go in 3D, you see I have a shaker door. Now if you want to give these two separate parameters for materials, you can. I'm anticipating it's going to be the same material, but sometimes the inside is a different color than the outside. But I'm just going to select these two here. I'm going to press my Associate Family Parameters button here, say Add Parameter, and call it Door Material. And click OK. So now we have a door, and it's fully flexible. How do we know it's fully flexible? Well, let's see. If I go into my Family Types, I change my height to 4 feet, click Apply. You can see the door flew up. If I change it to 2 feet, it should go down, and the 2 inches stayed. Perfect. If I change my width to 3 feet, you can see it stayed. If I change it back to 1'6", it should go back. And then finally, if I change my frame to 4 inches and click Apply, my frame bumps up 2 inches back. And then last but not least, the depth, if we change it to 3 inches and apply, you can see it all bumps out. Perfect. So now we have ourselves a fully parametric shaker door. Now let's load it back into our family. So if I say load into project, you want to make sure you select the actual family that we were creating before, or the family we're editing. And so that's the upper wall cabinet family. So now let's load it into our family. Now you can see it's loaded in. You notice that the bottom and top are reversed. So if you press spacebar on your keyboard, it'll reverse your family so that we're good to line up here. I'm just going to place it in front for now. And you can see there it is placed in front. If you go in 3D, you can see there's our cabinet there, our door. Okay, so let's align it in floor plan first, and then we can align it in elevation. So the first thing we want to do is align the back with our reference plane. So I type AL on my keyboard, I select my reference plane here, and I select the back of my shaker door, and I lock it. Then I'm going to use the same command. I'm going to use align, and I'm going to select right here, let's say, because maybe we want it to be standing inside, and I'm going to select it, and then I'm going to select my door. And notice how it pushed in and it didn't push the whole family? That's because it was a strong reference, not a weak reference. Same thing here. I'm going to select my reference plane, I'm going to select the inside of my door, and I'm going to lock it. Okay, so now we're locked in floor plan. So the next thing we have to do is on the elevation. So if I go to my elevation, use the same command, use align, and we're going to go from the inside of this overlay to the top of our family. Notice how it's stretched instead of pulled, right? Or instead of went totally with it because of the strong versus weak. Same thing on the bottom, align, and then select the bottom of my door and lock it. And there we go, we have our shaker family. Now if I mirror this, it'll jump to the other side, and it doesn't stay locked, unfortunately. So you have to relock everything. So let's relock everything if we want. So I'm going to pause it. I'm going to relock all of those dimensions, the exact same on the other side. Okay, so now we're totally locked up, and we have a shaker cabinet in here. If I type TL on my keyboard to turn off thin lines, you can see we've got our shaker, and it's not flush overlaid. We can test a couple things here. If we change the overlay, let's change the overlay to 1 inch just for fun and click apply. You can see everything shrunk in 1 inch. The center overlay, let's say for some reason the center overlay is 2 inches. Let's see how that works. You can see the center overlay went 2 inches. Perfect. I'll move all that back to 3/4 of an inch. So now the one thing that we didn't do, if you see if I turn off thin lines, this casework is a little bit thicker. Remember that whole subcategory and category thing? Well, we need to make sure that that's correct inside our actual door family. So if I go to my door, I want to change the category to casework. Okay, so now what we need to do is we just need to make it look visually correct as just like the other family, the original family, I should say. So if I go to my floor plan, the biggest difference here, you'll notice how these elements we created are black. Meanwhile, the existing geometry is gray. That's because there's an override. It's a symbolic family, and you're probably used to seeing it. If I go to my project view, and I go to my first floor plan, you'll notice the upper cabinets are always shown as dotted lines, right? So that's what we want to do. We want to create these as dotted lines. And so the dotted lines are already there because we created remember we used the out of the box. So what we need to do is just turn off the doors and the centerpiece. So if I select the doors and the centerpiece, and I go to Visibility Graphics Override, it's going to say right there, Displays in 3D Views, and we want to turn off Plan and RCP, and click OK. Now we're going to load this into our project. And you can see it looks just like it's supposed to in floor plan. If I go to my elevations, though, you'll see we have a shaker door. And if I go to my 3D view, you'll see we have some shaker doors there. So pretty neat. In the next videos, I'll show you how to create not only shaker doors, but maybe like a Victorian door within the same family, as well as perhaps adding some hardware and a couple of little accessories.